Starting with today's markets, the JSE closed a touch higher today, pushed by stronger global markets. All share indexes up by 0.5%. Among industrials, particularly Tiger Brands led the gains up by 2%. Steel giant ArcelorMittal down by 1%. That stock has now lost 20% of its value since news broke of a supply dispute with Kumba Iron Ore. The banks were mixed today, led by FirstRand up by 2%. Looking at the miners, the gold were mostly higher on support from the stronger metal price. Gold Fields up by 1%. Anglo Gold is a touch higher, but Harmony down by 1% after yesterday's big rise. Anglo and BHP gained 1% from the higher copper price, with Kumba Iron Ore down by 1%, Statoil closing unchanged. Looking at commodities, gold is trading higher. That's after 2 days of losses. Brent crude is now just under $80 a barrel. It's trading at a 7-week high. That's after the release of better-than-expected US unemployment figures. The rand is stronger against the major currencies, boosted by higher metal prices. And US dollar is getting weaker since the euro sees some recovery, trading around 136 per euro. Looking at international markets, the Asia closed higher this morning. Nikkei in Japan up by 2%, boosted by the weaker yen. The big markets in Europe were up a strong 1 to 2%, led by the miners and the banks. And Wall Street is currently trading higher by 1% after the all-important non-farm job loss figure came in at 36,000 for February, much lower than the expected 50,000. Reserve Bank's holdings of gold and foreign assets declined by $50 million in February. Total forex reserves eased to $32 billion, while gold reserves were down to $4.4 billion. The Reserve Bank says the appreciation of the dollar against various currencies impacted negatively on the country's forex reserves. The rand lost about 2% against the dollar last month. Well, our country boasted a 3.6% rise in foreign tourist arrivals last year, despite the worldwide economic downturn. A number surprised many as globally the tourism industry declined by more than 4% last year. Almost 10 million foreign investors arrived in the country in 2009 compared to 9.6 million in 2008. For much of last year, there was a pullback in the number of visitors coming from traditional tourist markets like Europe and the US. But visitors from new markets like India and China increased considerably. There was also a rise in visitors coming from other African countries like Angola, Nigeria and Kenya. Economic Development Minister Ebrahim Patel says he's exploring the use of private retirement funds to help finance social development projects. The private retirement fund industry has an estimated 800 billion rand of assets. In terms of the plan, 5% of the money would go to finance development projects. The proposal has been met with mixed reactions. Joining me now to share his view is Dr. Azar Chameen from Econometrics. Azar, good evening. Is this a good idea or a bad idea?
Frankly, it all depends on just how efficiently the government goes about using the money that it would raise from such funds to implement critical developmental projects. If some of the experience of the past few years in terms of some of the manner in which the parastatal organizations have been operating is anything to go by, it may leave something to be desired.
Now, this is not a new idea. South Africa has seen this before, hasn't it?
Well, it's seen it before in a different guise. During the old apartheid government era, pension funds were obliged to invest over 50% of their funds into government bonds. And this was a way in which government could raise money readily for its expenditure. Depends what you had. In that time it was spent on all these separate development projects. Now the idea here is that it will be spent on something a little more effective. We don't know whether it will be more effective.
But I wonder if individual pension fund members, you and I, should be taking a citizen do-good role and say, fine, if we will invest 5% of our money into projects that will create much-needed jobs.
Well, the big question is, will those projects actually create much-needed jobs? A lot of the joblessness in this country is attributable to the fact that those who are jobless because they don't have any skills that the marketplace needs. Will we be able to create jobs simply by investing in developmental projects? What does one mean by developmental projects? If it is, for example, building hospitals that require very technologically advanced machinery and equipment that has to be imported, or if it's schools that require computers that are imported, then you're not going to create jobs.
And I guess it's really important for individual fund members to think of what type of returns they could get from these government projects, because after all, this is your retirement nest egg.
Exactly. Much will depend on whether or not government can yield a return on those projects. And again, I come back to the example of the last few years in some of the parastate organizations who've been losing money hand over fist. There hasn't been a return on such developmental expenditure.
So overall, a lot more questions about the third proposal.
There's many questions.
We'll leave it there. Thanks so much. Goes off to Azar Janine from Econometrics. And it's over to Derek now for a look at the latest weather forecast.
Welcome to the Weather Center. Now the weekend is upon us across South Africa, and many of you, if not all, would like to know if the weather will impact your weekend plans. Fortunately, an area of high pressure is starting to build across the country, specifically in the upper levels of the atmosphere. So this is going to take over our weather pattern over the next 48 hours and gradually improve the forecast from Saturday into Sunday. In the meantime, however, on the outer periphery or the edge of this high pressure system, we've seen shower and thunderstorm development on Friday. So we're leaving a chance of thunderstorms overnight from the high point in Mpumalanga throughout Gauteng, the Free State, and into the Northwest Province. Let's take you into the future with our cloud forecast. The big story in the Western Cape has certainly been the heat. We'll see the thermometer working overtime for Saturday, could approach the 40-degree mark in some locations in the Winelands and along the west coast. More on temperatures in just a moment. You can see some of the cloud cover on our computer models, maybe an isolated thunderstorm from Kimberley into Bloemfontein, Pretoria, Johannesburg, as well as Mafikeng. But the eastern and western Cape will stay dry, and we do have another high fire danger in effect for the West Coast District, as well as the Cape Metropole near Cape Town. Let's talk about your wind forecast on Saturday. Northeaster from Richards Bay to Port St. John. As you look towards Port Elizabeth and East London, more of a southwesterly wind in the forecast, and southeasters take over from George into Cape Town with light and variable winds throughout the interior.